loves me, I said, oh my gosh, I never knew that I could be loved like this. I never knew that there could be such a peace and such a kindness, because I always was conditioned to believe that, like Jody, that I had to be this loyal down girl for her guy, even though he's a bad boy. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, he's doing that. And I thought I had to be down. I thought love had to hurt in order for it to mean something. And when I encountered Matthew, I found the opposite, to the point where he stayed in my friend zone because, yeah, he was nice. He wasn't even nice. He was kind. You know, he would do things he would go out of his way to do things that for me that but I didn't have the eyes to actually even realize what was going on. I knew that they were kind. I knew that they were nice, but I didn't have anything further than that. I just knew that, oh, I really like the things that he does for me, and I would in turn do things for him.
Hey guys, welcome to Little Black Bert 91. I'm back with another one. Yes, I'm back to give you guys another video breaking down, again, attachment styles. This particular video here, we are seeing dear future wifey and this couple here who were friends for 18 years. He was in the friend zone for 18 years. Pretty much she left him in the friend zone for 18 years. But they had some interesting interactions over the course of the 18 years, right? Where I feel like there was boundaries that were broken, but they didn't say it that way. And I think this is really a powerful video because we're going to talk about attachment styles, specifically the fearful avoidant attachment style, which is a bit more complex, a bit more contradictory at points, can be misunderstood when it comes to relationships and the way that they deal with their emotional bonds in a relationship. You heard her say here, you know, that he was so kind, he was so nice, and that's why I kept him in the friend zone. Huh? Right? There's something that was missing here, right? Which is the context and the backstory. So for 18 years, you kept him in the friend zone and dated toxic people, because the first boyfriend she had was a jailbird. The second one was an abuser. Okay, the third one, he was decent. He was better. Nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it wasn't the right kind of person, right? And so I asked myself this question: why does she associate love with pain? And the only reason why she associates love with pain is because fearful avoidants tend to associate love with pain. Fearful avoidants are simultaneously wanting love, but at the same time fearing love. And so they want to come close, but they got to stay away. Right? It's a hot and cold effect that they usually have. And they fear the intimacy and the emotional connection that they have, and oftentimes sabotage it. So what better way to sabotage a healthy connection than put yourself in toxic relationships where they don't value you, because actually it matches your mindset about how you feel about you. You don't value you in the same way. Your self-worth and your self-esteem oftentimes has been broken. Your boundaries have been broken. You've not been given a voice. And that tends to then lead to certain behaviors where you end up in environments where you invest in the wrong vessels, and it becomes an unhealthy relationship that becomes toxic. Now, I want you to watch this video through the lens of understanding that this could be you. If you have a fearful avoidant attachment, then this is a video for you. All right. I know there are dreams of having healthy love, but when you repeat the patterns of chaos and unavailability emotionally, this will end up leading you to relationships that are not good for you in the long term. Okay, there is a silent war that's going on with this young lady and the gentleman. Because listen, I'll talk about him part 3 of the video, where I believe he's got an anxious attachment because the relationship he was also in was toxic too, right? And so we have to understand that in order to be able to really break this down, a lot of the reasons why you do what you do is because it's trauma based. Okay, for her to leave him in the friend zone for 18 years, but can see he's a kind person, there is something to it. Now, before you jump on my neck, let me break this all the way down. So before I do, make sure you guys like and you share, you subscribe, you click on that bell button. Let me give you this breakdown real quick. I spoke about obviously attachment styles and spoke about the fact that she's a fearful avoidant. What does that even mean? First and foremost, attachment styles are something that was born out of an experiment done by John Bowlby, who was a British psychologist who was watching how children have separation anxiety from their caregivers. What he noticed is that there were 3 types of children. There was secure, there was avoidant, and then there was anxious people, right? The anxious children were when the caregiver left, they would be anxiously looking for the caregiver because they're afraid of abandonment. The avoidant would actually have a nonchalant, almost no effect to them, because for them, their emotional needs weren't met. The thing that made them afraid was rejection. So the emotional closeness for avoidance is that's their biggest flaw. They don't like getting emotionally close to people because really and truly, it's a fear of rejection. And then secure people tend to are very where everybody wants to be, but not everybody is. Secure children were able to attach themselves when the caregiver left and came back. They were emotionally available. They were able to respond adequately to when the parent left and when the parent came back. They trusted that when the parent went, the parent was going to come back. There was not a nonchalant response, but there was an understanding that the parent would go and the parent would come back, right? And so this is really important, Because actually then another person came along, Mary Ainsworth, who developed what we're going to talk about today, fearful avoidance. She developed by observing young children who grew up in households that are unpredictable, emotionally chaotic, usually contain some level of abuse. That can be physical, mental, spiritual, sexual, any kind of abuse like that. They grew up in households where there was a lot of fear. So maybe you grew up in a household that wasn't necessarily abuse, but you might have grown up in a household where you were afraid of your parents, your dad or your mom. Maybe were loving one minute and then shouting the next. Maybe you had two parents who were doing bad cop, good cop. Dad was the one that was angry all the time and everybody had to watch out for him. And you saw mom having to people please and step around him and tiptoe around him. And so you learned how to fear your parent. It could be the reverse. It could be the mom maybe was an alcoholic or a drug lord, individual or whatever, right? And your dad had to find a way to try and make the relationship, the household work. And you were afraid of maybe your mother and the way that you would interact with her. Maybe your mom was a very harsh person with her tongue you know what I mean? There were so many different examples here, right? The key admission here is that there is a fearful environment that you grew up in. Now it's really interesting because her environment, what she grew up in, she just tells us that she grew up in a sheltered home. And I think this is really important because when I talk to avoiders, when I'm coaching them, a lot of times when they explain how they grew up, sometimes there's a lot of what we call minimalization, right? They don't tell you the full truth of what they experienced because for them, they had to find a way to turn off the receptors of feeling because it was overwhelming as an individual, which is why the avoidance actually comes in. They're avoiding the anxiety of what they felt. And so when they grow up, they learn how to avoid the emotional stress of things by avoiding it. Yeah, just staying away from it. And for the fearful avoidant, they do both. The fearful avoidant carries both the anxious and the avoidance. Because remember, the child grew up in a household where probably maybe one partner was loving and another parent was a little bit more fearful, or you had one parent who was doing both, who was 1 minute, loving and caring, I love you, next minute is shouting and screaming the next day, or is overly stressed or whatever. And that creates the chaos within that child. There's an unpredictability. They're not sure how you're going to respond. And therefore, it creates what we call the fearful avoidant, who has a hot and cold behaviors, overwhelmed by their emotions, not sure what they feel all the time, have bad boundaries at times, don't believe that their voice is important, believe that they have self-worth and self-esteem is low because everyone else is better than them, pedestalizing other people, right? Over identifying with other people's needs, being of service to other people, even when it is to their detriment. And that's where you get the chaos from. In fact, that's where you get the relationship chaos that this young lady went into with her first two relationships. But let's just go back to what her environment was, because she gives us a little bit of this insight into what it actually was. Let's play
to the Rolodex of people, and I was like, no, I haven't. I was like, no, but he never crossed my mind either. But yeah, but anyway,
That's interesting. That's pretty dope.
I know. She told me. I said, what? I said, okay. I was
pretty
thinking,
prophetic.
I
Years
know.
later, she says that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So then what? So you got this guy, and then what happens?
Yeah. So I'm dating this guy. We dated for about 4.5 years. But during this time, I was young. I was very, naive, very gullible. I grew up in a Christian household where I was sheltered for the most part. My rap music was like Kirk Franklin.
Now, this is really important because she describes that her upbringing was very sheltered, right? And, rap music for her was Kirk Franklin. Now, whilst that may sound like, oh my God, that seems so normal. Like maybe you've experienced the same thing, right? It's usually have to read the cues underneath it, right? Somebody who grows up in a household who listens to Kirk Franklin and said, there's in that aspect, right? A sheltered lifestyle. Yeah, that sheltered lifestyle could actually just be that. But it could also mean that there is also a level of control that's not really spoken about. Right? You weren't allowed to do things. You weren't allowed to go out. You weren't allowed to go to a friend's house. You weren't allowed to see this person. Overt control like that also does damage to the child. In fact, it creates irregularities and inconsistencies. The child is over pampered with the way that you're dealing with them. And I should say pampered. They are overly restricted, which causes the rebellion of that child because the child wants to be able to be free and given a level of responsibility over a period of time, right? So it's really important that when we go to maybe look at these clips here, you're going to understand why I say this, because her natural inclination was to get with a man who was 20 years old and she was 15, but she lied about her age. Now, some of you are fast in your young age and you're probably going to say, that was me. But look at your upbringing and really ask yourself why you were lying to another man about your age.
Still in high school at the time?
I was.
You're in your senior year?
Mm-hmm.
So you're in your senior year. Who goes to the prom with you?
None of them.
None
My
of
boyfriend didn't go. He didn't go.
So you go-
It was just actually, I went to prom with it was just a really good friend, someone that I like hung out with.
Right.
Yeah. It was just like, we were cool. I was like, look, I don't want, and the reason why I chose to go with him was because I wanted no obligation.
Exactly.
I just wanted someone I knew I was going to have fun with.
Period.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens? So now this relationship that you have with this guy,
Mm-hmm.
what happens with this relationship?
So the boyfriend that I had, oh gosh, I'll just be okay. So
Welcome to the yellow couch.
no, really, because the boyfriend that I had, I started dating him when I lied to him. I was 15. I told him I was 16 and that my birthday was going to be in January. And when I met him, it was the winter time. So it was about 3 months. So technically he could have thought I was going to be 17 pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
So I was deceiving because he was 20 at the time.
Now, why would a young ass individual person want to fast up themselves to get into an older relationship? Well, because oftentimes there is a need there to deal with somebody who is potentially older because there's a father figure missing, right? And I say that to say because she actually lets us know that she was coming from a father's home a little bit later on in the video, right? So if you actually watch the video, my part one, I did this video in part one. She speaks about how the gentleman who's there, her now husband, okay, I want you to understand the boyfriend she's talking about, it's not this man. By the way, it's not this man. So the now husband here, okay, all right, is different to her boyfriend. Now the boyfriend she's talking about was 20 years old, much older, was a drug lord. Lord is a word that's you know what I mean? But he was involved in drugs, right? And she didn't know apparently. Anyway, so he was 20 and she was 16 going on 17 apparently, but she's actually 15. Right now, first of all, he shouldn't have been dating a 16-year-old. But number two, though, she's obviously lying about her age. Why? Because she comes from a household which is very fearful. She can't tell the truth. Now, of course, some girls will be fast up because they know they can't have a boyfriend. But you know, when you have those households where you can't have a boyfriend, you can't go out, you can't do this, can't go to the movies, you can't do this. It becomes so restrictive that the child has to learn some way of getting some type of freedom. They're not an animal. Right. And so I'm saying this because, again, it highlights the fearful environment that she may have been coming from. And therefore, for her to get some freedom, she chooses a relationship, right, to get that freedom. The problem is that the particular person that she's dating is somebody involved in drugs, which she said, obviously, she didn't really know until they busted the house down. But she was dating for 4 years. Darling, for 4 years, when he's disappearing on country, going elsewhere, going different places. Why is that? Well, because if we're really talking about the truth here, the lack of availability is also a problem with fearful avoidance, right? The lack of emotional availability. So somebody can come into your life, right, and be distant from you, but you won't notice because you're consistently in your anxious bag. The anxious bag of a fearful avoidant is that they're consistently always chasing an individual. And when you're always chasing, what tends to happen is this: they can't deal with silence. They also can't deal with distance. So any kind of distance, they make it up, not the other person. This is why the anxious always chases an avoidant. The anxious wants to make up the gap between themselves and the other party because they need to prove that they're worthy of love. The problem with the fearful avoidant is, even when they get the person, they start doubting then their actual value and what their self-worth is. So it goes back to that default setting. So long as he's been avoidant, so long as he's been on drugs and he's doing this, he's doing that, and he's buying her lavish gifts, which is what she talked about or whatever, okay, so long as he's doing all those things, right, she's in good stead, because actually the emotional connection of depth, when I say this in terms of depth, what I mean by this is allowing availability to happen, right, and really connect on a deeper level. There is an aspect that's missing from it, but it will seem like you had such a deep connection, right? And let me show you why.
We are detained in the house. Okay. And they're talking to me, asking me, what I know about the dealings of whatever my boyfriend is doing at the time. And I literally had no clue.
Of course not.
He had sheltered me from any involvement in what was going on in his life. So there was a whole side of him I didn't even know, but he's older than me. He's living his life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how I was like, this is making sense. I was wondering why he had the money, the cars,
mm-hmm.
and why we were always, on the Sunset Strip, doing this and that, having fun.
Oh, so it did make her wonder why he was able to always be in this place and how he was always spending this money. But it didn't clock your mind to be like, okay, wait, what's he actually really doing? And of course, she grew up in a sheltered home, so that's not what I'm really focusing on is the emotional connection aspect, right? Because you see, sometimes people can get away with certain things because we're not actually as emotionally connected as we actually truly believe we are. It feels like that because that's the level that we can go to. That's the capacity we have. Because if that's what you experienced in your childhood, then if you get the same pattern of behavior from your parent, it ain't no different. Bear in mind, like I said, I think her father and mother had separated. So that level of distance seems normal, but it's actually triggering an anxiety, which means that you overly close the gap, means you overly do much more than the actual relationship requires because you want to close the gap. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that, because later on, what she says is, I'm trying to save him. People that are trying to save people don't pay attention to actual signs. People that are saving people don't pay attention to the signs. And that's where the fearful avoidant can find themselves in that codependent state, in that savior complex, because what they're really trying to do is save themselves. But they're seeing themselves in the other person. Oh, the other person didn't get the love, they didn't get the affection, people don't hear them out. And really what they're saying is, I never got this. So I'm trying to give it to you because I never got it myself. Right? So let's go into it.
It probably took me a good 3 months. And I'm talking about being locked in my room, crying. I would journal. Man, I wish I had that journal still.
That'd be good to go read.
It would be. Yeah. My uncle threw a lot of my stuff away, which I didn't realize, but that journal was in there.
Did you ever blame your mom for separating y'all? Or did you understand?
At the time, I did not. I did
So you
not
felt
understand.
like, so even though the police said what they said, and even though you,
context of this, her boyfriend that went to jail, obviously that was in drugs, whatever. The police told her, listen, you have to cold turkey release him and get rid of him. You can't afford to stay with him, others will come and collect you next. And she did not understand, which is understandable. She was still young. But yeah,
you found out that he lived a double life, you still were blaming other people?
Yeah, I thought I could help him. I thought I could save him. I thought I could love him through whatever he was going through, and that he could just be more like me, you know?
So as she just said there, right? She felt like she could love him through it, save him, and be just like her. The delusion. And that's actually one of the things that happens with fearful avoidance, that they can get into a state of delusion where it's like, you're not looking at actually the facts of what's happening. And so you're looking at the situation from a lens of a savior complex. I myself, as a dismissive avoidant, still, I have some of that, you know what I mean? And I had to heal from that, because you don't realize the red flags are actually the green flags. You see, the more broken they are, the more attracted you are to them. Why? Because there's toxicity within yourself. And what you're really saying is, if they're toxic and I can give them grace, then I will be given grace because I believe I'm also broken. And we don't say it out loud, but that's the way it shows up, because we choose people that are actually building projects because we want to build, right? We want to be able to heal that person, because there is something in us that's broken that we can't heal. So we project onto other people to heal. So the fearful avoidant will do that, right, in that particular space. So as you can see in this aspect, I'm gonna go back to my last point. I'm gonna drop this part 2. I'm gonna drop part 3, where I'm gonna go through 9 points specifically to break this really all the way down for you guys. So let's play it a bit
Future
more.
and all those things I thought I was missing, I got exceedingly above, even beyond what I thought I was missing out on. Things just took off in our love. And again, the way he loves me, I said, oh my gosh, I never knew that I could be loved like this. I never knew that there could be such a peace and such a kindness, because I always was conditioned to believe that, like Jody, that I had to be this loyal down girl for her guy, even though he's a bad boy. I'm doing this, he's doing that. And I thought I had to be down. I thought love had to hurt in order for it to mean something.
And so this is the point I want to end it up, because my next point of the video, I'm going to start on that point. I'm going to give you 9 points about fearful avoidance. But this is really important what she says, right? The association of love being painful or love hurting, okay, is equating that love with that emotional or physical suffering is a stamp of the approval of what I would say is that the fearful avoidant believes love should be, what a relationship should be. But if you know that something hurts, you also have this hesitation to want to go in, which is exactly what it is. Imagine you stub your toe in a corner. You know how you approach that corner from then on outwards? You're always cautious about how you approach that corner, right? Sometimes you don't even want to go to that corner anymore, right? You're hesitant. That's exactly what happens to the fearful avoidant. It gets to a place where they associate relationship, love, with pain. And so actually that also becomes, I call it the calling card. So as much as they can be cautious and also afraid of it as well, which will cause them to have the hot and cold effect, it also is a way of a calling card. So when they see chaos, instead of actually going, that's chaos, let's leave it alone, they go, chaos. I've seen that before. I know what that looks like. I know what it smells like. I've tasted it before. This is familiar. And then it's like a moth to a flame. They get drawn in. There's a calling card to it. That's how you know you're unhealthy. There's a calling card that calls it, and you want to go towards it. Whereas other people are like, wait, that's toxic and that's chaos. I'm not trying to be in that. I'm walking away. When you're healed, you're like, that isn't for me. I need to walk away. That's not what I need to do anymore, right? So that association with the pain is dealing with the early romantic or even early childhood experiences, right? Of inconsistency, conditional love, harmful love, the unpredictable love. Okay, so when that person grows up experiencing those things, this is what actually forms. It forms as chaotic trauma bonding, traumatic dating experiences where you date people that are really not for you. But we're going to go deep into that in the part 3. We're actually go into all the different points because I want to bring that up. But if you're somebody who is fearful of avoidant, somebody who's fearful of avoidant, I want you to understand there is a way to heal, right? We need to first start talking about emotional safety. We need to start talking about emotional language, about emotional regulation, emotional connectivity. What does it look like? Because a lot of people want to be secure and healthy, but they don't know how to get to that place because they're not given the tools or the resources. That's what we do in the coaching, right? So for instance, when I say emotional safety, learning how to be safe with yourself first, not with someone else, with you first, right? If you have an idea that love is associated with pain, then we need to change the ideas. The ideas are coming from the experiences. I cannot change your experience. Your experience is your experience. What we can do is honor that experience and say, actually, let's reprogram that, because we need to uproot the idea that has come out birthed from that particular experience and begin to replant you, as the Bible says, renew your mind. We need to replant different ideas so that when you start to see the dysfunctionality beginning to run alongside your new programming, you're like, oh, okay, I'm making a choice. That's what the Bible says about the gospel, is that we now have the opportunity to choose life, not death. Before you were given, before you were saved and sanctified, you weren't able to choose life. You were just choosing death. And better yet, you weren't even choosing. You there was no choice. There was that you just went for it, right? And so when you're more healed, you can now choose the healing path rather than choosing the chaos that's been choosing you. Right? Oh, I like it because it likes me. That's essentially what we're doing in relationships. But no longer will you be liking it because it likes you. No, it doesn't matter if it likes you. I don't like you. When you're chaotic and when you're somebody who's dysfunctional, I don't like it. But we're going to deal with that in part 3. I'm going to go deeper with it for you guys. So make sure you guys are liking, you're sharing, you are subscribing, you're clicking on that wonderful bell button for notifications of the uploads. We appreciate you. Stay locked and loaded. And don't forget, listen, book in yourself a free discovery call. Please don't book yourself into coaching straight away unless you coached me already. Booking a discovery call. Let's have a conversation first. Let me get to know and see if I can meet your expectations and your goals before we go and book you into coaching. As much as I was doing that last year, new practices, new year, we need to do different things differently. Okay. I appreciate you guys. Stay locked and loaded. We'll see you again soon. Much love.